I am going to walk everybody, including myself, through the books that I read, through why I read them, why I continue to read them and reread them, how I take notes on the books that I read, and also I read a lot of scholarly and academic writing on the books that I read, and I take notes on that. So I'm going to walk yourself and meself, through all of that really, really quickly to give you a sense of it. So here I'm going to look at my library that I keep on my laptop, and I'm very meticulous about categorizing everything so I can make it both easy to access, easy for me to locate what I'm looking for when I'm looking for it, but also to help me kind of organize not just my um, desktop, but also my own mind. And the way I sort information on my desktop is kind of a mirror of the way I sort it in my own head, and also the mirror of the way I retrieve that information when I need it. So just going into some of the various stuff. So here's Hannah Arendt. I am I'm a big fan of her book three on origins of totalitarianism. A lot of her other stuff I find remarkable also, but in particularly that one I think is great. So not only have I read that, but I've also read um, and listened to, in fact, I have the audiobook as well. I've also read and listened to essays specifically about small, kind of tiny little components of that philosophy. So I'm going to be getting into some of those things as well in just a moment. But just to give you kind of a quick overview, Aristotle's not one of my favorites. He could be if I wanted to delve deeper into him, but it's all about the yield. So I've read enough of them that I've taken out what I think will have value to me. And I think there's a kind of a diminishing return on, further exploration of it. So here is, I'll just walk you through some of my own interests. Um, I have read a lot on civil wars, not on really just kind of the mechanisms and the battles and such, but really what are civil wars? How do they occur? How do they stop? What is the kind of political machinations and palace intrigues of the stuff? So I was particularly interested about this. I became interested in the subject when I read initially in Thucydides. I think it is maybe book three or book four off the top of my head, or 1 through 83 or 84 through 87, somewhere around there, um, about the Civil War in Corcyra. And I became very interested in not just in the Hellenic Civil War, but also how it resolved itself. So I then read several books that were about that particular time of the Hellenic Civil War, and again, how it resolved itself. And I guess this one's taking a little bit of time for it to open up, which here we go through. Some of these you'll see are audio files. I did that myself. I've had a lot of difficulty with my left eye due to a detached retina, and it's been repaired, but it has created a hindrance to my robustness of my vision. So I have gone through some computer programs that turn these into really remarkable audio books. So if I find a PDF I'm interested in, sometimes I'll turn it into an audio book. And yeah, I use Amazon Neural Poly Voices. I think I use the Matthew choice, which is really incredible. So here we have the actual, somewhere in here should be the book itself. And the book is Remembering Defeat. I recommend this book very, very strongly. So I've read this book, and I've also listened to it in its audio form, and I've reread it and probably listened to it again in its audio form many, many times. And you'll see my notes on that in just a moment. But this book is about how the Civil War occurred, the Athenian Civil War, again referring to Poseidon, to some other kind of moments. And it even touches upon the death of Socrates, why that happened, kind of what was the thinking at the time, and how was the country trying to resolve all of these differences, and these kind of the turnover, dynastic turnovers of the oligarchs and such and such. So Then there is another one on the Athens Civil War, which I would again same one. So on the etiology of internal wars, here is an essay specifically about the etiology of internal wars. As you can see, and so I'll be showing you my notes on all this because it's one thing to read something. It's another thing to reread it. And then it's another thing to take notes on that, where I think at a certain point, it converts it all to knowledge. So just reading something is just kind of a process. It's just moving the eyes left to right and allowing some part of that to kind of break into your mind, while is really requiring the knowledge and what the author meant to say, why they said it, the placement even of the commas takes a lot of it takes a lot of work. So again, here's another, The Logic of Violence in Civil War. This is a really good book, and I'll also show you my notes on that in just a moment. And now I'm just going to continue kind of perusing through this. It's also interesting for me to look through this. And interesting. So I discuss Machiavelli a lot. So I'll show you my own notes on Machiavelli, which again, I'm also showing me my own notes on Machiavelli. And Machiavelli is right here. So this is all I've read on Machiavelli, right? So as you can see, I'm meticulous. I file everything perfectly. History of Florence is, I have several different versions of the histories of Florence, several different translations of Discourses on Livy, on the Prince, several different readings of it as well. And that's because these things are essential reading, and these little tiny translations sometimes can have an enormous difference. I certainly don't suggest anybody get as into the weeds as I have, because an obsession can be a good thing until it's no longer an obsession, until it's no longer a good thing, and then an obsession becomes a bad thing, and it's very difficult to figure out what that kind of dividing line is, and to realize once you've crossed it. I'm sure I crossed it with Machiavelli. Nevertheless, here I am. So here's all the things I've read on Machiavelli. And again, it's not just the books themselves, but I'll find very small parts and slivers of these books that I become extremely interested in. With Machiavelli, for example, the use of good and bad cruelty. So I've read a lot on a very small section of Machiavelli, which is really just kind of alluded to within the Prince, I think chapter 7, and a little bit within Discourses on the death of Ramiro de Orca, and on the Borgias, and why they cut this guy in half, and the effect of the spectacle on people. And so here you can see that I read it as a PDF, and then I turned it, and here's the format that I used. And here I turned it into that PDF. I stripped out a lot of the citations and a lot of the footnotes, and I turned that into an audiobook. So I've taken this in several different ways. I'll run it through Amazon polyneural voice, and then it sounds like this. Nice, right? Pretty incredible. And so I think initially it probably looked like this. Yep. So here is the initial formatting and the way it looked. And as you can see, I did a lot of work on it. It actually only took me a few minutes. So I've read the PDF. And then so I could enjoy kind of a rereading of the PDF. I also, in this case, because I found it so informative and enjoyable, I turned it into an audio so I could listen to it on the plane, or while I'm in the car being driven about, or in a train. So just going on, I'll show you a little bit more of the Machiavelli because it's obviously very obsessive. And here's even more, which isn't that interesting. Here's even more of my Machiavelli. And again, some of these are very, very small pieces of Machiavelli. Just he'll have a couple of sentences. Academics will become very interested in those couple of sentences. And unfortunately, they'll write something so that as I become interested in those couple of sentences, I'll have a place, kind of this fountain to go into, where I can kind of immerse myself in better understanding what it is. My favorite of all of them that I would recommend to people so that they don't have to do as exhaust themselves as much as I did in their reading of Machiavelli is probably Erica Benner's a new reading of The Prince. I don't like her other work about Machiavelli. I find it's her other stuff is actually just bad. But I think that her new reading of The Prince is very helpful for most people who don't really want or who shouldn't really want to devote their lives into kind of the chasing down of the ironies of Machiavelli. So here's that book by Erica Benner. And then, again, going into reading Machiavelli rhetorically. So as you can see, I even turned this one into an audiobook. Interesting, right? And then I've described to people before that I got into Kurt Vonnegut. I got into Kurt Vonnegut because I'm very interested in how to tell myself a story. So how to have my own mind perceive of everything, but then also to be able to explain everything to myself. How do I tell myself the story of the greatest role of power in history? How do I tell myself the story of Dark City and how our memories of ourselves and who we are as a society, as a culture, as a people is being recreated? And there are a few writers like Kurt Vonnegut who can take these kind of abstract, fun concepts, but instead of kind of beating the reader over the head with them and making them kind of unenjoyable, he'll take very profound things and be able to just make it a whimsy and make it so that the reader can kind of understand it as the whimsy, but also be willing to spend a couple more seconds on each page really delving into it. So with Kurt Vonnegut, as a kid, a lot of us read Slaughterhouse-Five. I reread it again about 2 years ago, and I was so blown away by how he describes time and the physical properties that he gives time with the Tralfamadorians at the same time as he's taking away time's physical properties, that I went into, let me see where I can find this. Let me see where I filed, if I filed it on Kurt or whether I filed it on Vonnegut, that I became very interested in the academics of Kurt Vonnegut. Where did I put it? Kurt Vonnegut, let me see if it's here. Okay, so this is all the academics, not just the books that I read on it, but also the academic work that I read on Kurt Vonnegut. And as you can see, I turned some of these into. So as you can see, I turned that into an audiobook, but the original PDF is here, and then all the other PDFs, as you can see, are here. And I was very interested not just in the sense of time and how the sense of time is used, but in how he keeps the reader kind of emotionally engaged and intellectually tethered to these stories. And here we have Slaughterhouse-Five and the concept of time. Really just remarkable stuff. So not only do I read a lot, but I read a lot about what I read a lot about. Now, this also means that I have to take away from those things that I shouldn't read. What I mean by that is a person has to be very selective about what they let into their mind, because if they're careless, they're going to let too much stuff into their mind, and that too much stuff is going to cause conflict, cause confusion, is going to circulate in their head in very unproductive ways, or is just going to be bad information or unuseful or actually harmful to us. So it's kind of easy to let stuff get into our head, but it's very difficult to take it out of our head once it's in there. So I'm extremely cautious with what I let into my head. And here we see another essay on the modal structure of Slaughterhouse-Five, which I think is really remarkable. Again, more about how he creates these characters. Thucydides, I discussed Thucydides a lot. And so with Thucydides, let me just find, my eyes are still suffering a little bit, so it's a little bit difficult for me to see all this. You might have gotten a sense of that. But my eyes are getting better. So the surgeries are over, so that's good. So here you can see everything that, or a lot of what I've read on Thucydides. During a political history, of course, by Bauman, all the Donald Kagans, outbreak, more Donald Kagans, reading Thucydides, the reinvention of history of Thucydides, books about people misquoting Thucydides as people talk about the Thucydides trap and this and that is just ridiculous. The terms that were created to try and sell pseudo intellectuals on the needs for more war and why they need more money and kind of whatever. Um, and then different translations of it. But then, as you'll see, there's a lot of essays here also about Thucydides. Um, and I'll get into those in just a little bit because you're going to see it gets a little bit insane. And then I have an interest in Ukraine. I have a lot of opinions about Ukraine, but these are the things that have informed my opinions about Ukraine. Um, so I wanted to understand Ukraine from the sense of a civil war, because as I said, I'm interested in a civil war. But I also wanted to understand in the sense of how they've reshaped their own history, because they have, good or bad, arguable, perhaps, but it's a country that is definitely kind of reconfigured its own history. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll let other people argue, but it's undeniably something that has happened. Uh, I've read a lot about Tolkien and about how Tolkien wrote on fairy tales, and so at one point I would stigmatize myself about my interest in narratives and how to tell stories, and then I understood after reading Tolkien that it's important how we tell our stories and the mechanisms of how we tell our stories. So I also read a lot about how to write a book, how to write a movie. Um, I think they're called the Cat. I'll find it someplace, but whatever I called it. Here's all my great courses. I've probably bought about 150 great courses. Um, Nevertheless, so now I'm going to go into my notes on these things. So you'll get a good sense of, so you can, clearly get a good sense of this. Um, I've just, now keep in mind something. This is, I was very interested in, let me see here. Here's another example. Very interested in Nazi. What is Nazi? Term that everybody uses, but I was also very interested in Nazi propaganda and Soviet Union propaganda, and about the economy, because people like to talk about all of the Weimar Republic and this and that. Really good book, Adam Tooze, Wages of Destruction. Certainly recommend it to everybody. Also want to understand how drugs became such a big part of the Nazi social system, particularly for war, just as how wild sex became a big part of the Soviet Union under Lenin and Stalin, and how they exported that and then created this new type of communist sexual freedom where everyone was just sleeping with everybody else. And then there is this Weichbuch, which was Hitler's second book written after Mein Kampf, Goebbels' Principles of Propaganda. Really, really interesting. Okay, so let me just scroll a little further now. I guess we'll get into Julius Caesar. I've read so much about ancient Rome. And to give you a sense of that, here's my readings on ancient Rome. And as you'll see, a lot of these are the books, but then also books about the books and books about, here you can see is a book that I read, Spectacles in Societies in Livy's History. So it took those few instances of spectacle, and this book is really just about that. You can't understand Machiavelli unless you understand Savonarola. So here's Savonarola. You can't understand middle class wealth creation and political systems if you don't understand the commerce revolution that was occurring in the 15 and then into the 17 and 1800s with the portability of money, and how it created a middle class, which is now when you have these CBDCs, it takes away the portability of money. So it means you take away the middle class, right? And so you can see I'm a huge Scribed junkie. I am always on Scribe. I'm always on academia.edu, where just I can't even tell you how much time I spend a month just reading through these things and deciding what I want to delve into further or what I shouldn't be delving into further. So it's all about the yield. And as you can see, hopefully, if you can kind of scroll in, you'll see that a lot of this stuff gets very exact. Plebs and politics in the late Roman Republic, which was how they structured their language to appeal to the plebs, how they enlisted the plebs as their own kind of mob force, how the senators kind of used these plebs, these armies of plebs, how they stalked the streets. And they became their own militias, and it's a lot what you see again in Ukraine, or you see in Pakistan, and in many other countries where the police and the legal system no longer works, other than in kind of the New York Times type of headlines. These countries don't really have that type of a judiciary, legislative bodies. Everything is done by kind of brute force. So how these brute force mechanisms are introduced and then kind of even formally legislated into power, but just use different type of terms for it. So I'm going to close up all of that. And now picture my cat. That's unfortunately, that beautiful cat has left us. I miss her very much. So now I'm going to show a little bit of how I keep my notes on these things. So now you've seen kind of this collection, this library. It's digital, and I have an enormous paper library also. However, that's as meticulous as that is, I've been giving a lot of them away so that these things will stay in circulation in a very Fahrenheit 451 type of way, which requires that these books be kind of committed to memory, because I think that they're going to be short-lived. The way these books are stored is short-lived. We're coming into different times now. So here, I'm very interested in how to write, as I've said before. So I've read a lot about how to write. How do we tell ourselves a story? If you have a great, you may think you have a good perception of what's occurring in politics, or Trump, or DeSantis, or Biden, or Newsom, or whatever it is, or you have some type of a deep financial ability to do forensics on this or that. But it also requires that you be able to express it outside of your head. So it's one thing to be able to tell yourself it coherently, and then it's another thing for that to take all of that into to have it leave your head so that other people can hear it as you say it and think it. And you might discover that once it leaves your head, it's not quite as elegant and as economically worded and as profound as you believed it is. And that's not necessarily that it's not good thoughts. It just requires a lot of chiseling away. And so I'm very interested in how we tell ourselves stories, even a story of what did I do today, but particularly the story of what's happening in the world around us, because it's so sensory overwhelming and so extraordinary that our own cognitive reasoning really can't decipher it. It takes a tremendous amount of effort, but it all has to start with how do we tell our stories? What is interesting? How do we expand on it? In any event, who is the hero of your story? Screenwriting. I've read so much about it. Save the Cat on books and movies. It's a whole series. It's really, really good. So let me just continue on. Then Civil War, as I've said, I have a lot of interest in Civil War. So you've seen what I've read, and now these are the notes. These are actually just some of the notes on what I've read, right? So I read Thucydides' Tyranny and Terror. These are my notes on these books. I read Remembering Defeat, as you saw. Now these are the notes on that. I've read Kurt Vonnegut. These are the notes on my Kurt Vonnegut, on Kurt Vonnegut's Concept of Time. You've seen how much Machiavelli I've read. These are my notes on all of those books on Machiavelli that I've read. You've seen, me talk about my interest in, how Goebbels was able to kind of enlist the local population to be a participant in the propagation and diffusion of their the Nazi regime's propaganda. Very interested in that. It's really remarkable how they created a bureaucracy to sit on top of, how these created all these parallel bureaucracies, and it's really interesting. But forget about that. Orwell. I'm extremely interested in Orwell. I'm not a fan of 1984. I've read it twice, I think. I haven't enjoyed either of those readings. I think it's tedious. I think it's boring. It's dull. It's it's exhaustive. I just don't feel any type of like an enjoyment or nourishment while I'm reading it, or when I'm done with it. I didn't put it away and say, "Oh, what a great book it is." I was really just, "Hey, I'm glad I finished this thing. I really didn't like this book." But I am extremely interested in the concept of newspeak, and I'm very interested in the concept of Julia, right? Of who she is and how she embodies this type of insubordination, I guess, maybe. But so I've read a lot about 1984, and about the language, the words that he chose, and about newspeak. And newspeak itself is very complex, because then I've also read a lot about metaphors, how we use metaphors. So I'm very interested, and that goes into when I think of newspeak. I'm also thinking of software in mind. So this is something else. You've seen I've read a lot about Thucydides. Here's all I've read. Here's all I've written about that from my own notes. But then let's, as you can see then, I don't know why this doesn't show. So let me just see how this goes. Word documents are read for a while. Okay, so here, as you can see, or even more. So now you see the way I've categorized it. These are the ones that are uncategorized in a folder sense. And these are all the notes that I've taken for myself. Aristotle's Science of Tyranny notes. So, just I actually have a folder called Tyranny. So I guess this was something that particularly interested me. From the book Aristotle's Science of Tyranny, to hope that human beings can flourish and achieve greatness under a tyranny is very much like hoping that an oak tree can become tall without sunlight, and thus Aristotle despised, and so on and so on. My own notes there. Byron tyrant model, which I'm very interested in, because I'm certainly cautious of this current regime. I'm very interested in China, and I've got folders and folders on China and what I've read on China that I probably didn't spend any time with you here on, but somebody read a lot about how about journalism in China, because it's not only is it a leading indicator of where our own journalism has gone over the past several years, but what journalism has been in China and what it is now and what it is here. And so these are all the notes, as you can see. We discussed Tolkien, and here is his fairy stories. These are my notes on fairy stories. Look at page 38. So now you can see how I write my notes. Look at page 38 of the essay. It's not about fairies. It is Feria. It is the realm of state. So you can see how my notes go. Interesting, right? So hopefully you can see that. What I'm writing, in case you can't see it, is I wrote on page 39, to distinguish it from the three other types of stories: a traveler's tale. It has a fantastical element, but it is not in fairy. It's in a distant part of our own world. 2, a dream story like Wizard of Oz. Movie, and I'm having a little bit of difficulty reading right now just because of the way the computer is, and my left eye is a little bit messed up. Movie type where it's actually a dream. Frank Baum wanted to write American fairy tales. Number 3, beast fables are talking animals that are really just symbols of human foibles and human aspirations. So what is a fairy tale as a cauldron of story? This is how he expressed it. All of this is mixed into a pot: mythology about the gods, legends about extraordinary human beings and superheroes, folklore about ordinary human beings, history. An example is King Arthur. What is the value of fairy tales? They are not for children. They became for kids in the 1800s, but when they became exclusively for kids, they got dumbed down and they lost their darkness. But adults need fairy tales because they provide 4 things: fantasy. Let me scroll up. Fantasy, the ability to imagine something that does not exist and through art to make it real to someone else. To give the inner consistency of reality its subcreation. To make a secondary world creates effort and few attempts and few accomplish. It's narrative arts. Number two, we can recover our youth and regain clarity. Number three, escape. Fairy tales are accused of being escapist. Tolkien said, "What's wrong with escape? What if reality is dull or cruel or boring?" And those are some of my notes on that. And Falsehood in Wartime, very interested, and that's from Barnes, who is a historian. I'm extremely interested in historiography. And to show you my interest in historiography, I'll go backwards a little bit. Now I'm looking through my library again, and I'll go to the section specifically about historiography, just to give you a sense of how interested in historiography I am. So here, these are just some of them. A History of Histories by John Bauer, Arthur Meltzer, Cleo's Battles, Gordon Wood, History Inventing the Middle Ages, which is really incredible. James Banner, Changing History, Language, Stasis in the Role of the Historian, in Thucydides, Sallust, and Tacitus, which is a book that I read, and a series of, it also has, there's a series of scholarly papers on top of that. And it's really incredible. And then Murray Rothbard wrote on revisionism itself, and other people have written about the ever-changing history of past and present. So from there, as you can see, I take a lot of notes. So here's my notes on historiography, and it's not really meant for other people to read. I'm just sharing it with you. It's meant for me to read about what I have read. The cops, and now we're referring to, the cops in Egypt, never lived in a state of their own, and therefore their historiography did not develop the genre of royal chronicles, which in many other historiographic traditions were stimulated by the institute of the monarchy and its propagandistic, legal, and other needs. So here I'm just writing for my own. I'm not writing for other people to read what I've written. I'm writing it so that I can recall. So these are a lot of associative type of things. How to start a book, how to tell history. Very interested in how to tell history. Nevertheless, my point is, let me just go back to here. So really, my point is, it's not just what I read, because I don't want to sound like some type of a snob. It's just as important what I don't read. I don't read anything contemporary for the most part. I don't care about Matt Walsh. I don't care about Ben Shapiro. I don't care about Ann Coulter. I don't care about Michelle Obama's, whatever she calls her book, Believe, or whatever she calls it. I don't know. I don't read any of this type of stuff. I read very little modern books that are even political science, or even particularly economics, although there I do have some other interest. Nevertheless, I try and keep out of everything contemporary, because everything contemporary now is so influenced by its ambitions to be a bestseller and an immediate economic kind of return to the author. So it used to be that books were written over a great by better writers, and they had a patron. So now, and a Matt Walsh might have written something, but it would have been, well, probably not. But nevertheless, now Matt Walsh's patrons are just the consumer who's going to buy it on Amazon, or who's going to find it, discover it through Twitter, and he's just going to capitalize on the adoration that we have of libs of TikTok, and he's just going to turn that into some type of a book format, add his own ridicule layer to it, and produce a bestseller. I'm not interested in that. Ursula Le Guin has written about the whole industry of creating bestsellers. And if you have a sense of it, you'll see that they're all for idiots. Don't read any of them. It's very bad for your brain. Again, letting it into your brain is easy. Taking it out of your brain is very difficult. So I'm not just sharing what I have read, and what I've read about what I've read, and what I've read about what I've read about what I've read, and what I've written about what I've read. I'm sharing with you also all those things I haven't read. Because as you'll see, although I did actually buy the Matt Walsh book, I did that as a favor. for the most part, I just don't read contemporary books. There are very, very few um that I've purchased. Because again, I don't want to let it into my head. I don't want to let it run rampant in my brain and the damage that their words can cause in my thinking and the way I perceive things, the way I conceive of things, the way I explain stories to myself. I want it to be all mine, not Matt Walsh's. And if it's not going to be mine, because I'm not a great thinker, I would rather it be Plato or Aristotle or Machiavelli or somebody good, so that I can at least give it kind of some real authority and really ponder it and turn it over and hold it tangibly and hold their thoughts kind of tangibly in my hands and twist it about like a Rubik's Cube and really study their words. So here, talking about economics, I'm a big Karl Popperian. So I've read a lot of Karl Popper. I've read a lot of many times kind of rewrites on Soros and the theory of reflexivity and Karl Popper-ism. So here, these are just my notes so that I can recall, and it's associative. So about Karl Popper, again, going back to this, it says people should really read Karl Popper because it reminds you to question what truth is and what a fact is. So Karl Popper is not just economics, but it's also kind of a philosophy of what is a lie. And you have to know what a lie is so that you can prosecute the liar. So here, as you can see, I've read a lot there. Reality TV. I'm very interested in reality TV because reality TV is the way. Reality TV, I include the View, programs like that, CNN, The View, all those TV talk shows, whatever. Pretty much all of TV is meant to instruct middle class norms, how a middle class person and lower middle class and lower upper class should look, sound like, how they should appear, how they should behave, how they should think in order to be conformed, in order so that society won't shun you. And it's very interesting. So I'm very interested in reality TV. I'm very interested in the how society kind of sells personas, as you see here. Um, so I've tried, because people have asked me what books I read and about reading the classics. I've emphasized reading the classics a lot. Um, I've tried to share with you that I do really read these classics a lot, and to give it some type of like a bold font size 28 font emphasis on that I really do read these classics a lot, but not just that I read them, but that I reread them exhaustively, and then I find small pieces of what's in those books that also intrigue me. And then I always allow my intellectual inquisitiveness to be on. My curiosity is always on. So if I'm interested in a particular part of something, I'm happy with stopping this first book and then picking up this essay or this academic or scholarly work on that other small piece I'm interested in, completing that, and then going back to the original, source book. So is this more Thucydides or is this the same Thucydides? I think this is more Thucydides. I'm not sure. Nevertheless, okay. Nevertheless, so that's it. I wanted to walk everybody through what I read, what I don't read, why I read it. I've discussed it a lot about Machiavelli and Thucydides and reading the classics. Cicero, again, just looking at Cicero, these are all the notes I've taken just on Cicero. Cicero. And let me actually take a look at some of these notes. Some of these I haven't looked at in over a year now, actually. Yeah, I remember what. And when you write something, there's such this kind of associated memory that I actually remember writing these notes. So here, as you can see, I write down where the source is. And here I'm very interested in Cicero, who always thought of himself as an outsider. Even he had acquired tremendous reputation. He has always thought of himself as an outsider, and he realized that society thought of him as this kind of new man, but that was an outsider. So that's about it. I've talked a lot, and now I'm going to stop talking so much. And that's it. You know as much about my reading now, and what I don't read and what I do read as I do. So enjoy it or not. Thank you for your time. Bye.